Hello,
Hello,
everyone.
everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Janera Ali, and I am a part of the Making Sense International team. We'll kick off this event with an introduction to YouthLead, and then I will hand it off to Azam for his presentation. About the YouthLead, it was launched in 2018 under the USAID-funded project Youth Power Learning. YouthLead.org is designed for young change makers who are making a positive impact in their community through service, activism, advocacy, education, and entrepreneurship. The YouthLead Ambassador program, which Azam is a part of, is an 18-month professional development and leadership opportunity for young change makers with a proven track record in mobilizing other young people to have a positive impact in their community. Azam has been doing fantastic work in his community, and we are excited to listen to his presentation on sustainable economic development for youth, and he will share the Southeast Asian perspective with us. Over to you, Azam.
Hi, thank you very much, Zainaira. Hi, everyone. It's 9 p.m. here in Brunei. But wherever you are, good morning, good evening, or good night. Okay, so yeah, my presentation will be on sustainable economic development for youth in a Southeast Asian perspective. If we could go to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, okay, so this is how I'll structure this presentation. We'll start with sort of a broad overview on issues on economic development in the region of focus, which is Southeast Asia. And, we'll cover some topics there, sort of at a surface level, so that we have some context. And then we're going to move into the meat of my presentation, which will be a case study on one of the ways that youth try to improve economic development, which is through entrepreneurship. And this will be a case study on a project that I'm working on an agricultural project I'm working on here in Brunei as a youth entrepreneur. Then we'll move on to the Q&A session. And then, at the end, a reminder for everyone to, take action and do the best that they can. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's go through some definitions. I think, everyone sort of has an idea on what sustainable development is, youth, things like that. But I'll have some definitions for my presentation so that we're clear cut on the context that I'm trying to set up. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, so sustainable development, in the context that I think of it, is sort of the combination of three main features, which is economic development, social welfare, and environmental protection. This definition sort of originated with the UN in the late 1980s, where they described it as combining several concepts, which is the needs of different stakeholders, especially the world's poor, as well as being aware of the consequences of rampant, industrial and technological growth. There are negative consequences to that, and so that we have to be mindful of, steering our development in a sustainable long-term manner. Could we move to the next slide, please? Right, and what does it mean to be youth, right? I think everyone sort of, personally, I think it's someone who has a certain level of life experience and maybe is missing some other types of life experience. It's usually someone who is still learning, still in their development stages, or maybe someone who's freshly out of education and freshly into the workforce. But for this presentation, we'll do 15 to 35 years old-ish, right? But the UN defines it in terms of employment and economic data. They define it as like 16 to 24 years old. ASEAN, the ASEAN Foundation, and some of their reports, and ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It's like the major geopolitical bloc in Southeast Asia, comprising 10 states right now. And they sort of define it as like under 30s. For me, for this presentation, I'll be doing 15 to 35 years old, right? But it definitely changes on the context you're looking at, right? So let's all be aware of that moving on forward. So next slide, please. Right, so I just came up with, or like I just would like to bring up a couple of simple vital statistics, right? Which is Southeast Asia is a large is a large sort of demographic area covering 661 million people, numerous ethnic groups, numerous nations, economic conditions, and the youth comprises, I think this is as of 2021, comprises approximately 224 million people. So about a third of the population are youth, right? And so this is a huge sort of area. Next slide, please. And one of the issues facing youth and youth development in Southeast Asia is unemployment, youth unemployment. Now, one of the main things, and I sort of hinted towards this in my last slide, is that this is a large region, right? And in large regions, you're going to have different experiences. So here's sort of a quick map made by the ASEAN Post on youth unemployment. I think this is pre-COVID, but the numbers wouldn't have changed that much across ASEAN, right? And you have a very varied experience. So my country, so this is a very important topic to my heart because my country suffers the worst for youth unemployment in ASEAN, approximately 25% here. I think it's around 30% as of today, right? And this isn't just those 15 to 24, this is under 30, right? So it's a huge part of our population unable to seek consistent employment, right? And it's very unfortunate. But it's not the same experience everywhere. Some nations like Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore, they have far lower levels of unemployment. But this is an issue because throughout all of ASEAN, there are similar common threads that all youth are facing. One of them is the concept of underemployment, right? So many parts of Southeast Asia are economies which survived on agricultural and industrial growth for the last maybe 50 years post-World War II. And unfortunately, what's happening now is that they're trying to make a push or breakthrough into, more advanced tertiary-based economies, right? But they're sort of struggling with the concept of a middle income trap, which is where they're unable to make that transition. And one of the reasons is, one of the consequences of that is that a lot of youth, they finish university, they have their degrees, they have degrees in things that they're passionate about, and these are more advanced degrees, but the economic opportunities available to them remain within, agriculture and industrial jobs. And so this creates a skills mismatch, right? And this creates tension for youth because they feel like, they are not getting the jobs that they want to have or that they expect to have, even though they're willing to work very hard, right? And this creates a host of other issues as well. Another thing, we're talking about different experiences. The economies with lower levels of youth unemployment, they also have certain trade-offs, right? So for example, Singapore, which is a very advanced economy compared to some other nations in Southeast Asia, their youth, in terms of development, suffer through things like mental health, right? And so youth have varied experiences, but there are common threads that sort of everyone experience in this sort of generational demographic change that we're all experiencing here. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Great. Another thing facing youth, and this is something unique to our generation or our cross generation, is the impact of COVID, right? So many youths in Southeast Asia, and I think this is true across many parts of the world, had to switch to online modes of communication, payment, economic development immediately during the COVID period. If you look at this graph over here, taken from an ASEAN youth survey by the World Economic Forum, youths in Asia were asked, what tools did you use for the first time during the COVID-19 pandemic? And many, up to 50%, said they've used social media or engaged more with it for the first time, right? And so there's this intense pressure for youths to engage with technology. And, this pressure existed across all elements of society, not just youth, but youth did experience it uniquely because other members of the community, like elderly people in someone's family or vulnerable individuals who did not have technological literacy, would rely on youths in their community to help onboard them onto technology, right? So there was an immense burden on young individuals during COVID to sort of be the focal point for their communities to help manage access to technology, maybe for their parents, for the loved ones, or people with vulnerabilities, right? And so this was a very interesting situation for youth, and it absolutely was applicable here in Southeast Asia. A quick example I could give here in Brunei, but I think this is true in both Malaysia and Indonesia as well. A lot of people were selling things, at small stalls on the streets, but when COVID came, they were unable to go outside to sell. And so they had to immediately switch to online platforms like social media. And so you had this huge wave of people trying to get onto social media to start selling things as vendors. And there was a huge amount of friction. And a lot of young people had to help their parents who wanted to make things and sell things. They had to help their parents set up shops online. So, you can sort of see the intergenerational pressure that this situation was creating. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is sort of a continuation on the data of what I was just describing, right? The burden specific to youth, right? And it wasn't just with regards to technology and the push towards adopting technology. Youths also had economic pressures to provide, right? Many youths who may have been in education, they found themselves studying from home, and they then received pressure to create economic output at home to maybe take care of their parents who were no longer able to work, right? Or parents who were limited in their ability to provide for their family. So many members of the family had to come together to sort of find an income for their family. And I think if you look here in the statistics, right, some of the issues facing youth were that they were extremely worried about family members getting ill. Many youths lost family members during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Mental health issues spiked up as well. So this is a very sort of once in a lifetime event that youths around the world experienced in COVID-19. And this really impacted us in a unique way here in Southeast Asia and other parts in the world too. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have these issues. What are the solutions that sort of are discussed by policymakers, right? And the solutions are the same solutions I think discussed in most parts of the world, which is a push for youth entrepreneurship, right? And encouraging youths if they can't find skill match employment that matches their skills or qualifications, they would get encouraged to try entrepreneurship so that they can work in the industry they want by creating businesses, creating jobs, and sort of developing the industries of their choice, right? And hopefully this would push the economy towards industrial advancement. And another sort of solution, which gets discussed as well, is trying to increase more youth government dialogue, right? And I know several, in the West, there's been quite a bit of success with youth advisory groups trying to initiate a process between government and youth stakeholders. Unfortunately, here in Southeast Asia, because of a sort of more conservative social role mindset where youths are sort of not are seen as having a certain role in society, which is less policy influencing, less decision making, and those who hold political power or those who are older, those who are more experienced, are seen as the role of policy and decision makers, right? And so even though all stakeholders recognize a need for there to be dialogue between demographics, between the youth and government and youth and other stakeholders, there's a social barrier, right, in conservative Asian society, conservative Southeast Asian society, which makes it difficult to have effective dialogue, So it's a solution, but it's partially self-defeating because is it as compatible within our regional context as it would be maybe within the West or in other parts of the world? So that's sort of an interesting point of discussion. And finally, it's embracing technology, right? Solutions for youth is sort of, try to create more advancements, try to innovate, try to help unlock the potential within their communities, to create better economic development and growth, not just for themselves, but it sort of has a multiplying effect across the entire community. And yeah, so these are sort of the main issues that I'm going to be focusing on. If we go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So I'll focus on one of these issues, one of these solutions, which is youth entrepreneurship. So I'm a youth entrepreneur myself, right? Well, I do that as a side project. I'm not a full-time entrepreneur. But I went through the process of trying to create an entrepreneurship project. And so I thought I would try to sort of tell my story and walk everyone through a case study of what I've been through so that we can sort of highlight the issues that youths such as me have experienced when trying to create entrepreneurial projects here in Southeast Asia. So what am I doing? Well, I'm part of a wholly youth-led agriculture project here in Brunei. Uh, Brunei, along with other ASEAN nations, have tried to improve agricultural development, right? So some nations are self-sufficient or closer towards self-sufficiency. Other nations are further away. And in this sort of era of supply chain sensitivity, all nations are recognizing the importance of having an improved agricultural supply chain domestically and improved access to agricultural resources for the sake of national security, but also sustainable development as well. So let's go through my case study and see a little bit more about the experience for youth here in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. Right, so here's a bit of background. Brunei, I don't know if anyone knows much about my home country, but it's a country which does not have a very diversified economy. It's a sort of oil and gas resource-based economy, but we don't have that large of an agricultural base. So the issue of developing an agricultural industry is especially strong here in Brunei, right? Which is why some leaders such as myself focus on that industry, right? And one of the things that governments try to do to promote the various industries is to offer, things like government financing, grants, or network building opportunities, right? At an international level, there are network building opportunities sort of at a Southeast Asian level with organizations like ASEAN trying to create youth summits, agriculture summits, things like that. At the government level too, they also try to push that very hard, right? But one of the issues that countries have in this part of the world is that many countries will have advantages in some parts of the puzzle, but they have disadvantages in other parts, right? For example, here in Brunei, we may have things like availability of grants, but we don't have things like a strong network, right? Whereas another country, maybe like Singapore, has ability to obtain financing, network building, but then there may be less resources that can be given out by the government in terms of grants or things like that, or physical resources to entrepreneurs. This is in contrast to areas in the West, such as America, where they have an economy which is diversified enough that there's sort of enough of every element, right? But unfortunately, that's not the case here in Brunei and also many other parts here in Southeast Asia. And that does create a challenge, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so let me run through the idea that I, as a youth entrepreneur, came up with. And what we're trying to do is grow vanilla spice, vanilla, like the ice cream flavor here in Brunei, right? And this is a concept that touches upon sustainable development because where it's a crop which hasn't been grown here in Brunei. So there's an attempt at sort of diversifying the agricultural base of Brunei. And it's also Brunei imports is a heavy importer of different types of goods, including vanilla spice. So again, this improves sustainability by creating other avenues for locals to source certain goods and services, right? And if this succeeds, it creates a multiplier effect where if we produce one thing here, we might produce something else here, and that sort of creates a more local base, right? And that helps improve sustainability because it diversifies a country's economy, right? But one of the issues we faced with this idea was things with like basic market research, right? Like in some countries or more advanced cities or areas, right? You have consultancies, market research consultancies who you can contact and liaise with to sort of have a better understanding of the market for certain goods and services. You don't have that developed in many parts. You don't have that developed here, and also in certain other countries in Southeast Asia as well. So you sort of have one missing piece of the puzzle. And what that makes it difficult for, one thing that one consequence of that is that youth sort of have to do the research themselves, and they have to do it with far less resources than someone who is older, and also someone who is in a better geographic location, right? And I also mentioned the issue with the networking effect. When you're young, you don't have as large of a network that you would have when you're older, and so you have to sort of start from scratch as well. And the final thing is, we wanted to do some testing on the idea, and we had to sort of grow vanilla in our backyard to see if it would work here in Brunei before we would like try to launch a bigger project here. And when you're young or when you're a youth, you don't have the financial resources to do a detailed sort of technological test or detailed study. You sort of just have to try ideas out with very little resources, right? Or less resources than you would have if you were, older, or if you had more resources. So, you're starting with less, right? And less pieces of the puzzle. Next slide, please. Okay, so a bit more on the timeline, right? In 2020, 2021, COVID struck here in Brunei hard, and that sort of stalled the entire process, right? For us, we basically couldn't get the project off any further until after COVID finished, right? And the reason is because the government just switched its focus from economic development to, COVID survival. And, one of the consequences of this is that youth such as I were unable to pursue their projects more consistently. I mentioned the issues of the COVID impact towards youth in an earlier slide, which was youths were given a burden and a responsibility to become more proactive stakeholders in their community, to help the elderly and vulnerable gain access to the internet, to help manage, internet access and technological use in households and their community. And so because of that, youths have less time and less energy to be able to focus on things like entrepreneurship. I mentioned a lack of resources, and yes, we had no financing available. And what we had to do was reach out to government and check out what government schemes they had. And one unfortunate thing with that is that there's a lot of bureaucracy involved. And one challenge as youth is that you don't have the life experience to know how to handle bureaucracy. I think, when you live life and you interact with the government and you have experience interacting with government, you sort of understand how bureaucracy works and you understand how to pierce through it. But when you're a youth and you don't have that experience built up, it becomes very challenging indeed. But we did have a breakthrough in 2021, which was where we visited some experts who were growing vanilla in a different country. And this sort of touches upon a benefit of being a youth, I think, because a lot of experts and mentors offered to help us, right? Because they themselves were passionate about growing things and growing vanilla. But they were, experienced individuals, and they had so much knowledge and they wanted to pass it on, right? And so one advantage you have as a youth is that if you genuinely have a passion for something, you can go approach someone. And that person, if they see that passion in you, they would be more willing to help you out than if you were someone more established who's done other things, because they know that their time that they invest in you will have a longer horizon toward yourself, them, and the community. And sort of this idea of engaging with other members of the community and asking them to mentor you is a very powerful asset that youth have, because people are willing to give you that goodwill. Next slide, please. So how did we go about getting started? Well, we needed land, and as youth, you don't have many resources, so we didn't own any land or anything like that. But we were able to leverage government schemes that targets youth, that targets people like us, for a land grant. And that's what we did. We engaged with the government. We went through a lengthy bureaucratic process, but we were finally able to sort of get their notice and attention. And we did a site visit to some undeveloped plots of land, and eventually we succeeded. And there are two things here, right? There were pitfalls, like we were so inexperienced that we were making mistakes in the process. We were submitting one thing when we should have submitted something else. We were doing one other thing when we were supposed to do something else because we had a lack of experience. But when you're young and when you're youth, all these other stakeholders, and this is similar to what I mentioned about mentorship, they want you to succeed. So they won't get too upset or angry with you, they won't cancel the whole process. They'll give you second chances, they'll give you third chances, because as youth, it's understandable if you fail, it's understandable if you make mistakes, and it's understandable if you do things wrong, right? And so sort of allowing yourself to be humbled by your lack of experience and being vulnerable as youth in that way allows you to engage really well with other stakeholders, like the government. And that's what happened here. And eventually, they did give us a land grant for about 1 hectare of land, which is about 100 meters by 100 meters to pursue our project. Next slide, please. Okay, so another challenge when you're a youth entrepreneur is actually developing the business model itself, right? Even if you have access to government resources, you need to have a sustainable business model. And one of the difficulties we faced is that, when it comes to this aspect of developing a project, there is no excuse because you're an entrepreneur and you have to make a functioning business model work. People won't give you resources or financial aid unless you can demonstrate that you have an idea that works. And this is very difficult because you need to make your project up to the standard of someone who is experienced, right? Because if your business model has to be as developed as sort of a standard that everyone meets, right? There's no excuse for being young there. You have to have a full business model. You have to have a full, properly fleshed out idea. They treat you like adults in sort of that realm, right? And one of the things when you're a youth is that you will have issues with the skill set, right? Like when you're older or when you've developed your career, you will have developed, a bureaucratic skill set, legal skill set, understanding of this and understanding of that, which helps you put the puzzle pieces together when you want to start a business. When you're a youth, maybe you'd be specialized in, financial analysis, but you might lack in another area because you haven't had the time to develop that, right? It's very rare to be young and have the enough experience of every piece of life to be able to come up with a functioning business model. And so, we sort of had to really go through the fire there and had to have multiple iterations. It was a lot of work. And I think, that's just one of the challenges you will experience as a youth entrepreneur, right? You have to have your business model and idea up to the right standard. And we don't have the resources to just hire consultants, So that was a problem, but we sort of pushed through with that. Next slide, please. Another thing, and I touched upon bureaucracy before, but like there's a lot of legal work that you have to do, and that you have to do as an entrepreneur, right? You have to form a company, and this is very difficult because you have to, in our experience or like sort of in research, many youth have casual projects, right? Or informal business projects. So they would maintain it as a sole proprietorship, maybe as a partnership as the legal form of the entity, because youths don't have the resources to hire a lawyer or hire someone to form like a company with limited liability. And this, creates problems. And, you have to have basic legal knowledge to sign contracts. We had to meet import and export requirements. We had to do basic accounting. And we didn't have the money to make that happen. So we sort of had to fumble along. So that was a challenge as well. Next slide, please. Yeah. And another thing is sort of relationships, right? When you're a youth, and here's sort of like a picture of how far I think this is from a month ago when we were building the greenhouse for the project on a plot of land, right? When you're a youth, you don't have the network to put things together, right? You need to find contractors yourself. You need to find suppliers yourself. And one really unfortunate thing is that when these people meet with you and their businesses and they're profit motivated, what they do is they try to take advantage of your lack of experience. And there's sort of like really nothing you can do about that because you just don't have experience and you have to pay the painful lessons to learn. And we had that painful lesson, I think, multiple times. We hired someone to clear the land. And we even tried like sending out tenders to multiple different like contractors to do it. Every single one of them like, overpriced us. And we eventually settled on someone else who was, who we thought we could trust. And that person eventually like upcharged us with different things that we didn't know. And we had no experience in the sector that we were working in. And when eventually what we did was we asked someone older than us with more experience to represent us in one meeting, right? And even though that person had nothing to add to the meeting itself, he was just there as a face for us. The fact that that person had more experience gained him respect from the contractor and the people we were interacting with. And then they cooperated with us more on economic and commercial terms, right? So one of the challenges you see is that because you're inexperienced, people will try to take advantage of you. And this creates a very difficult situation. And there's, very little youth can do about that, really. It's just one of those other disadvantages of being a youth entrepreneur that you just have to overcome through pain and struggle. And yeah, that's very difficult. And there's also things like experiencing bad luck or failure, right? Like we imported some greenhouse parts and we built them. And unfortunately, some of the parts weren't up to scratch and then they broke apart, right? Which we then had to reorder. And this delayed the entire timeline, the increased costs. And, when you're an entrepreneur, you're already a risk taker. And when you have such limited resources to try again, right, these things can be absolutely devastating, and they can really devastate your idea and project. But, again, that's just another thing you have to really go through. And I think going through this experience, it really taught me the importance of accepting the fact that you're going to fail and or that you're going to experience failure, and also accept the fact that you are taking risk. And risks sometimes don't pay out, but you just that's just the life you have to live when you're a youth entrepreneur, and you have to just take that in stride. And so if we go to the next slide, yeah, these things, I just like to sort of summarize the experience, right? So the last slide, which showed like a video of where we were, we've progressed just around, that's basically where we are now. We haven't started operating yet, but we're hoping to that in the next couple of months. So we're sort of in the very early stage of the idea and the project, right? And already from there, you can see there are several pitfalls you'll experience as a youth entrepreneur. Things that, will stumble you, but there are also benefits, right? And I think these benefits, youths really have to take advantage of, which is stakeholders do want you to succeed. Like government stakeholders absolutely want you to succeed. So even if it's even if it's something that is humbling, like even if you have to admit that you don't know something, but you really want help on something, the government would absolutely, and stakeholders like the government would absolutely like to help you, right? They want to see you succeed. And also you can seek out people like mentors or people who are very experienced, and they are more willing to help you than they would be to someone who is, further along in their career, right? When you're sort of an empty canvas, they see it as an opportunity to really pass on their knowledge and skills. And that's something us as youths can take advantage of that no one else can, right? But one other thing we noticed is that, you can, from this entire story, is that you can't, as youths, do anything just on your own. You have to be part of a community of stakeholders to succeed. And, one of the issues with that is that if we don't succeed, then we can't help this stakeholder succeed, who can't help this, who can't help this, who can't help us, right? So all this whole of nation approach or whole community approach is really necessary to have sustainable economic development, not just for youths, but sort of the entire community. And it's a challenge that the world is facing right now, and Southeast Asia is facing too. So, okay, I think that's the end of my case study. We've got quite a bit of time left, but I've got it. But I think there's a lot more I could have talked about my case study, but these would be like specific answers to questions. So I think if anyone just has any question that they'd like to ask, I'd be happy to like talk about it.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Azam. That was wonderful. And before anyone else sends in their questions, if you have a question, you can raise a hand or you could just type that in the comment section. But while others are typing in their questions, I have one. And being from South Asia myself, I totally understand what you mean when the system is trying to hold you back, or when people are trying to take advantage of you. My question is towards the team building approach. While you were building a team for your project, how did you do it, and what were the aspects that you were looking for? And
Okay.
if you have a team that's working on the same cause as you are, do you think there is an opportunity for cross-generational collaboration where people with more experience who are as passionate as you are to the cause can join your team, and maybe that works out?
Yeah, okay, great question. So one of the things about team building as a youth entrepreneur is that you have to make difficult choices, right? I think if you had a lot of resources, you can sort of build a team from scratch and you can pick the pros and cons and trade-offs that you want to have. But when you have less resources and when you have a smaller network, you have to settle with what's available. And that's sort of what I had to do, right? So like my co-founder on this project is literally one of my closest friends. And that's he happens to be someone who's very passionate about the idea as well and passionate about agriculture. But I simply did not have the network to go scouting for other people who might be, you know, a better fit or a worse fit or what have you, right? I had to just scout what the existing network I had and just look for people within that network. But you know, we found each other, right? We're both youths, and we decided to work on the project together. And I mentioned about how at some point we were getting taken advantage of by people in the business, right? Like a contractor who was upcharging us, hiding certain costs from us. And what we eventually did was we engaged with someone from a different generation, an older, more experienced individual, and we essentially just asked for help, right? We were like, you know, this is someone in the industry, you're someone in the industry. We don't really know what we're doing, and we feel like we're getting taken advantage of. But this is our idea. We're very passionate about it, and you know, we don't have much to offer you, but could you help us out? And you know what? He said yes. He was a retiree or almost a retiree, operating his own consultancy, and he had all these other projects he was working on. But as sort of like, you know, in his spare time, he would give us his advice. He would tell us, you know, this is how you engage with the contractor. Some contractors want a deposit, some don't. If you give them a deposit, you will pay less for the overall project. But if you don't give a deposit, then if the contractor does something wrong, at least you haven't, you know, risked your money. You'll just not pay him, right? And there are these things that you don't know as someone who's inexperienced. But once we engaged someone from a different generation who was older than us and had that experience, we were able to bridge that gap, right? And the reason I think we were able to add that person to our team was because we demonstrated the level of passion we had, and we showed him that, you know, we really wanted this to work. And he was surprised. He told us that he's never seen a youth in his entire 20, 30 career. He's never seen youths who want to do something like this in agriculture, right? He's seen people who were more established who want to take advantage of a market opportunity, but he was less interested in that. But he was interested in us because of the passion we brought, right? And that's how we got intergenerational skills added to the team. So yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, any more questions from you, Zanaira, or from the floor?
No, thank you so much. That's really helpful to know. Does anyone else have any questions, any comments on what Azam has shared so far?
It could be anything, really. I'm an open book. You know, any experience could be a really difficult thing or a happy thing. Just feel free to ask or not. That's fine too.
And Azam, I think it will be helpful if you have any links associated with the work that you're doing, or even just your personal contacts, like your LinkedIn. If you could just drop those in the.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that right now. I'll drop my LinkedIn, but
Okay.
my agriculture project isn't on my LinkedIn. But I'll drop my LinkedIn anyway, because you know, there might be questions which pop up in people's heads that they might only think of later on. So feel free to connect with me there. Let me find my profile.
Great, thank you. Well, I see if there are no more questions, we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much again, Azam, for sharing all that knowledge and your own experience with us. I think it's really helpful for anyone who's trying to navigate the difficult system that we all have to go through. The recording and slides that Azam has shared with us will be available on youthlead.org in a couple of weeks. So please feel free to check them out. And Azam has shared his LinkedIn. If you want to connect and maybe collaborate or have more questions, you can reach out to him. But that's all from us today. We will be hosting another event soon, and all the information will be available online on YouthLead and our social media channels. So feel free to connect with us there and stay updated. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.